I'm Kelly Cervantes, and this is Seizing Life, a weekly podcast produced by Citizens United for Research in Epilepsy, CURE. Margaret Storey is the mother to a 15-year-old supergirl, Josie. Josie has Aicardi syndrome, a rare disorder that causes intractable seizures as well as other physical and developmental disabilities. Margaret is also professor of history and associate dean at DePaul University and an incredible parent advocate for children with disabilities and medical complexity. I was first introduced to Margaret through one of Adelaide's therapists as a go-to resource for all our special needs parenting questions, and she has since provided us with a wealth of information. We are talking with her today about how to improve the quality of special education programs for kids with severe epilepsy. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Margaret.
Of course, I'm happy to.
So excited to have you here. So you wrote this incredible blog for the New York Times several years ago about the need for special needs education to go beyond the IEPs, the individual educational programs in the integrated classrooms. Explain your thought process and your concern in sort of the standard available education system.
Sure. A self-contained school is a school that's purpose-built for students who have disabilities. And it's a public school. And this is really a rare thing. And Josie, by the time Josie was able to attend a self-contained school for kids with disabilities, she was 7. So we'd seen the models, and she's very severely disabled by her syndrome. But my desire was to find a place that would suit her and support her in ways that the self-contained classrooms that she'd had up to that point really hadn't been able to do. When she was in preschool, it was fine. But when she hit first grade, it was devastatingly segregated. In the classroom where she had to go in the public schools in the city, where we lived at the time, she was part of a group of students who literally rolled in through a separate entrance. They could not even go through the same door as all the rest of the kids. They rolled into that entrance, they stayed in that classroom. They sometimes got to go out for school assemblies where they were rolled out, pushed into the front row, pushed back out, went into their self-contained classroom. And this was always wrong to me. I just felt that this was a terrible segregation of my child. And I knew that she could not be educated alongside typical peers because of the severity of her needs. But I also knew she could learn, that she loved learning, that she needed to be stimulated and challenged in all the ways that other kids do. And what I found was in this little corner of a school, she was in daycare. They just did things like make Rice Krispie treats. They weren't teaching her in a real robust way. And so I'd heard about a school in Evanston through a colleague of mine, actually, DePaul, whose son went there. And we went and visited it and said, that's what we want for her, because she rolls through the front door. The whole school's built for them. There's no place in that school that a kid can't go. And all of their peers are disabled, but they have peers who love them. They have friends. It's rich. There's a curriculum. She's got dignity. Her disability isn't a thing to tuck away. And most importantly to me, her disability isn't used as a way to train other people how to be sensitive to disability.
Right, and I think that, that's such an important point is that when you're talking about integrated classrooms, is it the best for the able-bodied kids or is it the best situation for the disabled kids? And you would hope that in the best case scenario that both groups are getting something from that.
Exactly.
So you're talking about the self-contained classes for, mostly for these severely disabled kids. What in your mind sort of quantifies that? What is that?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to depend kid to kid. One of the things that I think is problematic, though, right now is that ideally we have a spectrum of services for kids with disabilities. I went to great pains in that article to say that I am not denigrating inclusion as an approach. For some children, it is just exactly the right thing. And I absolutely laud the parents who fought tooth and nail to make that happen. And they were pioneers. And so I want that full spectrum. But for some children, either their medical needs or the complexity of their developmental needs, their physical needs are so significant that to really be able to have them fully access an education, which is what they are promised by federal law, they need the structures and the trained personnel to do it. And we cannot do that in a cost-effective way, always by segregating people out into the mainstream classroom. You really do need this support that's focused in one place sometimes.
I think you bring up such an interesting point, and the array of disabilities and the array of options. You think of your typical able-bodied minded child, and you still have educational options. Oftentimes within the public school system, you could have them go to a Montessori school or the traditional
charter
school,
school,
an IB or whatever. There's all of these programs that you can pick the best learning style for your able-bodied minded child. But when it comes to your disabled children, those same options aren't necessarily there depending on your school district. Right. So what is the other side of that argument? Why aren't there more options for parents of special needs kids to try and customize their child's education?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One of them is about money.
Of course.
This is expensive. It's expensive to educate children who are complicated. And the mandate that you do it is a federal mandate, but the funding to support it is not always available. And so we have a real disparity, a terrible, tragic disparity, as we do in all public education, for children who are impoverished in poor neighborhoods who will just simply not be able to access this. We had the great privilege to be able to pick ourselves up and move to a community that is dedicated to this kind of thing and has the resources to support it. So there's that. There's a question of financial need, like how much it costs. But there's also a philosophy that developed pretty strongly in the 90s that we don't want to segregate people with disabilities. And I get it. I totally get it. It's part of an inclusion movement that Josie has benefited from in so many ways. If we think about what the world was like in 1960 for children like Josie, if she would have even lived, and I doubt she would have lived, but if she had been alive, she would have been institutionalized and much less had access to school. Okay, so as parents advocated early on really for access to education, a lot for children with Down syndrome, they changed attitudes, they changed laws, they opened things up, and we moved toward a more inclusive system. But that inclusion may be overcorrected. Like that can go a little too far.
Interesting.
And we can over-articulate that as the only way to do it. So I always found it ironic that people who are very, very committed to that way of doing it almost to the exclusion of anything else will say that you're not being educated, you can't have a good life if you're not educated with typical peers. And I just thought, why? What does that say to us about the dignity and richness of the lives of people with disabilities? My daughter has taught me immeasurable things that I never would have learned if I'd had a typical daughter. Do I wish her suffering didn't exist? Absolutely. But at the same time, the idea that these children can't have relationships with each other, that they can't learn, that they aren't happy when they're only educated with children with disabilities, it's just not true.
Yeah. You have the self-contained and, she has, the specialized education piece, but, which is all important, but at the same time, she still does have a lot of medical needs.
Absolutely.
She likely has seizures at school, I'm assuming.
She certainly does.
And so how is the school better equipped to manage that than a typical integrated school? In
my experience, and there certainly will be exceptions to this, but in my experience, what's great is that because our school has got a therapeutic bent, the orientation towards families is different. The orientation towards families is more that you're a partner in this project, rather than this outsider who's trying to tell the experts how to do things. And that's essential, as you well know. When you're working with any kind of healthcare provider, you need that partnership. And most of these kids are getting healthcare provided at school. So they're both an education provider and healthcare providers and therapists. And that therapeutic reality means that you're able to explain, like for Josie regularly has seizures that are going to be longer than 5 minutes. If we were going to look at a standard protocol for the use of a rescue medication, 5-minute long seizure that you give Diastat. Right. If we did that for Josie, she'd be having Diastat all day long. We don't do that for Josie. Josie can have a seizure that lasts 15 minutes, and it's okay. I know it's okay, the doctors know it's okay, and the nursing staff and the teachers there learn how to take care of her within the context. I give them the parameters for what is her seizure plan, and that's what we set up every year is the seizure plan. And that plan is highly individualized. And they know to call me or Jonathan at whatever moment is the kind of trigger point where I'm like, well, then we do need to go into some other protocol. But because of that, they're not afraid. They don't treat her like she's, a China doll. And she's able to have a normal day, and she lives her life, and she has seizures every day of her life, pretty much. Sometimes she doesn't, but so it's wonderful to be able to partner with a team and to feel that they understand your kid and you're able to shape that. And at the same time, they then trust that you're open to being shaped too. And so that team helps me understand how to communicate with Josie better, or helps me understand certain things that are going on at school that I don't know about. She has a life that I don't know anything about, which is exciting.
How exciting is that?
It's awesome. It's awesome. I want her to not have my eyes on her all the time.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great gift.
Yeah. So how can parents find out what schools are available to them, where that, if they do have the financial means that they can move into that neighborhood, or
if they don't, assert the right to get their kid there, right?
So what, how do you find out if that school exists?
It's really hard. It's really hard. And it depends on where you live. Now, in some places in the country, the process is really transparent. But in a lot of places, it's just not. And again, this gets to the way that budgets hide behind philosophy. So that the budgetary desire not to invest in that way can sometimes cloak itself in the idea that this is what's best for the kid. And so to get around that, you need to talk to other parents. Right. Almost always, our best information is going to come from other parents.
Hence how we met and our friendship.
And how I learned about the school was through a friend. And how I learned how to advocate for her there was through friends and the example of friends. So fellow travelers are a great resource. And that's my advice, would be to start asking questions. And if you're stonewalled, just keep asking questions.
Yeah. This is probably I can't even imagine a massive undertaking, because this building needs to be accommodated for all sorts of special needs equipment and that sort of, so this is a long process to get a school like this up and running. But what options are available if there are a group of parents that are like, we're
band together?
Yeah, that we need this. How do they lobby for that?
Well, it's funny because Josie's school was originally invented by parents. They founded it in their house in 1954.
Oh my word.
Right. And it somewhere in the next 10 to 15 years, the school district said, oh, we'll take that and help you with it. So sometimes what it takes is that kind of thing. You find like-minded parents and you figure out if you can make something happen. But I also think it's reasonable to start to talk to your local elected officials, to your local school board, find your school board member and say, have you ever considered this as a possibility? What's interesting is that sometimes these are solutions that can in fact be budget-wise, but they don't assume it. And I think that talking to your local officials, talking to fellow parents, looking at other models, coming and visiting other schools. Some of these kinds of schools are run as consortium-based enterprises, so that multiple districts will band together to fund a school that kids from different districts come to, so that they can share the challenge, the budgetary challenge, and create a place that works for these kids. So it's always possible to make it happen, but it is hard and it does require dedication. And I always say, it's hard because so many, if you're in the situation, you're parenting a child like this, your bandwidth is not always there to
I
do
mean, I
this.
can't even imagine sitting down and trying to
exactly.
to create a school out of nothing.
It's
an overwhelming thought.
It is overwhelming, and I think that the problem is that this is unfortunately often where we are, which is that the people who know best what's needed are in the least flexible place to make it happen. And so if you can't do everything, you can do a little thing. Try to find an advocate who you can talk to. Try to get the idea out there. And if you can't do it yourself, there might be someone else who's in a position who can. But it is challenging. It's a reality.
Now, talk to me about, what is Josie's typical day at school? What does that look like? What are the programs that are available to her? What makes it different than being in an integrated school?
Well, the day starts with everybody coming to school, obviously. Some kids are dropped off by their parents. Some kids come on the bus. So we all come in the front door, which is important, right?
Yeah.
Through the front door, and they go to their various classrooms, and then they have a normal day of schedule. So they have the range, depending on their age, if they're in preschool or if they're in high school, depending on their age group, they have the range of appropriate curricular structure. So Josie has language arts, she has social science, she has, arts, drama, theater. They have a hugely rich curriculum. She changes subjects hour to hour.
Oh my
She has
goodness.
adaptive PE, so she has PE every day, which is adapted to her needs, and they're fantastic. And the ratio is really low. I mean, we're talking about a teacher and 4 paraprofessionals in a classroom of 6 students.
Wow.
Right. And so that kind of a setting is the kind of setting that can allow you to support a child like Josie. And so I'll just give you an example. In the last 3 years, she's made incredible strides with communication. So Josie's nonverbal and non-ambulatory, which means she can't walk by herself. She can use a gait trainer. But it's limited. And her verbal communication has never developed at all, but she has been able to develop some eye gaze, picking pictures, eye gaze strategies around communication, which has been super. And a lot of that I attribute to the introduction of Epidiolex. When she started to take that medicine, we saw real changes in her cognitive function. And her teachers worked laboriously to teach her how to do this eye gaze system. And then I said, do you think we could try now with a device? And we tried other devices. Her disorder means that she's not really able to functionally use her hands. She doesn't really want to pick anything like a switch. She'll do it, but it's not her go-to at all. And I said, can we try again with another device? And they said, sure. I said, well, I'm going to take her down to the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab and let's see what we can do. Evaluated her for an eye gaze device. We did a trial. She took to it like water, just because they taught her the strategies. So it's set up, it's got a little thing that gets your eyes calibrated, and you pick a picture and it speaks for you.
Wow.
Right. So her teacher, her speech therapist, her OT at school.
And all of those therapies are provided within the school?
Absolutely. And they're a part of her IEP. And those people have been with her since she was 7. I mean, they know her very well,
And are they employed by the school?
By the school district. And so they structured a trial, figured out how to see if she could use it. She clearly could use it. We pitched it to the insurance company, crossed our fingers, and amazingly it was approved. And she's had it since September in school, and they've integrated it across the curriculum. And she's using it. And she's using it in ways that aren't just to pick things. So I'll give you an example. We were talking to her dad, who was visiting his mom in England, on the iPad. We do FaceTime, and I had the device up. And I'd set it up so she could start to say some phrases that are related to being happy. And she kept saying, this is fun, this is fun, this is fun. And then she navigated out of that to another weird screen with a bunch of animals. I'm like, oh, that must be from school. And she kept saying lobster, lobster, lobster. And I was like, what is she talking about lobster? We joked, oh, did you know Nana loves lobster? We have no idea why she's talking about lobster. Off we go. And then she starts, her dad says, I want you to find the crab. Is there a crab? And she won't find the crab, but there's a crab right there. And I'm like, well, you know about crabs. Crabs have pinchers. And sometimes when we're crabby, we're crabby because our words are like pinchers. And the next morning, she's 15. She doesn't want to get out of bed anymore. And she's moaning and groaning and complaining and cranky. We get her to breakfast, set up the device. It's on the table next to breakfast. She starts looking at it. I set it up for the breakfast panel. She gets out of there. She goes back to the animal thing. And the first thing she picks is crab. Crab. I'm like, are you telling me you're crabby? Are you crabby?
And how incredible that your nonverbal daughter, she's able to communicate with you and you can communicate with her.
Exactly.
And that, the therapy and the training that takes, it couldn't have happened in an integrated school.
It would not have happened.
The resources aren't there.
And the time and the dedication and the expertise, it could not have happened. And moreover, everybody, me included, and I have a lot of faith in her, didn't know for sure she could do it.
Yeah.
And there she is, trapped.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, can you do it? And I'm so literal. I have no way of thinking about that lobster comment that she made. When I get her to school that morning, I said, oh, we used it this weekend. The device was great. And he said, the parapro said, oh, did you notice how much she likes our lesson on the coral reef? And I said, oh, that's why that's there. And he said, yeah, her favorite animal is the lobster. And I thought,
my goodness,
what I needed to do was to go find a lobster video.
Yes.
Weird as that is,
yes.
right? And say, yeah, let's talk about lobsters. Because what she was trying to do was tell her daddy that she had learned about lobsters at school, which is what a kid does, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so there's these moments which just take my breath away. Because I think, I underestimate you every day.
Yes.
And what we all can do when we have a setting like that is not make that mistake.
Yeah.
We train ourselves. But if she's stuck in a room with 3 other people, and that's that, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. It absolutely isn't. And,
right.
And I do think that, the integrated classrooms probably have their purpose for some children who are, higher functioning and who can gain from that experience.
For sure.
But for our kiddos that are going to need a lot more help. I mean, I didn't even know that something like this was available.
Possible. Yeah, exactly. I know that Josie blossomed when she went to school. And I had this terrible time thinking of her riding on the bus. But for kids with epilepsy, this is also an issue. Like, for her to ride on the bus, she has to have somebody on the bus who can administer diastat.
Yeah.
And that took some advocacy. So she could ride the bus. There are these kinds of things that you need to push for. But at the same time, if you can make it work even for just an hour a day or 2 hours a day, they have an identity beyond your caring for them. And this is tough. Like, when you're constantly a caregiver, we do circumscribe their existence, right?
Well, and I think more to your point, when Josie is in the self-contained school, you get to focus on her abilities and what she can learn versus being in an integrated school where everything is focused on her disability and how she's different.
Right, and getting her to more of a place. Well, she's never going to be in that place.
Right.
I mean, and this is, for me, I'm not shocked by that.
Right.
This doesn't disturb me. I've long since been disturbed and upset that she has these losses. But that's not about meeting her where she is and helping her be a fully expressed human being.
The best version of her.
Absolutely. And having her be happy. When Josie was little and things were really, really bad, I mean, she was having, tons of seizures every day. She couldn't do anything. She could barely sit up. She couldn't smile. It was horrible, as you well know.
Yeah.
It's just heartbreaking and terrible. And I remember Jonathan and I looking at each other and saying, if she can be happy, that's what we want. I'm not praying for seizures to stop anymore. I'm not praying for her to walk. I'm praying for her to be happy. And that's been the thing that's made me move in everything I've done, every point of advocacy I've made. It's about how can we have these children fully experience happiness in life. And if that means less drugs, then it's less drugs. If that means a self-contained classroom, then that's what we're going to do. And I'm not so concerned about whether or not she fits in or she's like other kids. She ain't like other kids.
Yeah.
She's her own special version of a kid. And that Josie world's okay. You know, it's a great place in a lot of ways. It's not easy. You know, I don't put all roses on it and say, oh, this is just fantastic, because it's not.
Yeah.
But within that reality, you can carve out these places of joy and real recognition of her as a person, not just the subject of our constant anxiety.
Right. Margaret, thank you so much for coming on. This conversation was incredible, and I learned so much, and I hope everyone watching and listening did too. So I appreciate you taking your time.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you for doing this whole series. It's wonderful. Thank you for all the work that you and Miguel have done for CURE. It's amazing. And, you know, kiss Adelaide for me. She's such a love, and you know you're always in my thoughts. I know it's not an easy road.
It sucks, but
it does.
We appreciate having people like you around.
Absolutely.
Thank
you.
The devastating effects of epilepsy on children's development and education is just not acceptable. We need a cure before more children suffer the consequences of severe epilepsy. That is why for the past 20 years, Citizens United for Research in Epilepsy has worked with researchers around the globe to fund patient-centered research focused on finding that cure. Help us today by donating to CURE. All donations, no matter the size, have the potential to make a huge impact on children with severe epilepsy. Thanks so much.